Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Digital Classroom. Today it's about spooky and creepy. It's about Dracula. It's about creating a mood. So lock your doors, bolt your windows, and get ready. Okay guys, so as you already heard at the start, we are doing a little bit of storytelling. And this is actually very important in photography. Think about photography. It's painting with light, but it's also telling stories. That's where photography actually shines, right? Freezing a unique moment in time that will never come back again. That's photography. And that's what we love about it, right? Mesmerizing images, something that transports you to another reality. So today we're going to do just that. And do think about lighting in a slightly different way. For example, with music, you can very easily create emotion. Think about Queen. You go from Mama Just Killed a Man, very, very sad, to full out heavy metal. Or think about emo. Think about pop, funk, punk, whatever you want to do. It's always that feeling in music that really transports you, or that special moment. But you can do the same thing with lighting. So for this setup, we wanted to create something that was a little bit spooky. We're using our ClickPropsBackdrops to create a set. And that's the first step in creating something that's a little bit more believable. You can of course place your model just in front of a backdrop, but in that case you have something that's two-dimensional. You have the backdrop and you have your model. The camera doesn't see depth, so it just creates something two-dimensional. By using vinyl on the wall and pro fabric on the side, I'm actually creating a sort of a corner. And by creating that corner, I'm already creating three-dimensionality in my set. That means that I can do more stuff with lighting, but also with set dressing. And that's actually what we do here. Now, the first thing that I think about when I think about Dracula is that old vintage looks. So, for example, chandeliers. I think those are awesome in a castle, right? Those chandeliers. Now, I'm using a black mist filter on my camera, so that means that all my highlights are already a little bit nice blooming. And I really like that effect. So, how did we build the set? So we're using that pro fabric and that vinyl, we're using a floorboard, and we are actually creating a backdrop system with two chandeliers. Now the chandeliers you can get very cheap on a flea market or anywhere online. They're not that expensive. The only thing you have to realize is those chandeliers are continuous lighting. Now we're using light bulbs and they're pretty powerful, but still compared to a strobe it's nothing, right? A strobe is way more powerful. So we have to make sure that we balance those two nicely together. Now how do you do this? Now, I'm using Hansel strobes, and there's a reason for this. The Hansel strobes have a great range. That means that although I'm using a 500 watt strobe, I can turn it down all the way to 2.8 ISO 100. And that's what I really need in a set like this. I want to go as low as possible. Now, when you buy strobes, you have to be careful that you buy strobes that have enough dynamic range. If you buy a 1000 watt strobe, it will emit a lot of power, but if it only has 3 stops of range, it will only emit a lot of power. You can better for a studio buy, for example, 500 watt strobes with a decent dynamic range, 5 or 6 stops, that's more than enough. Now in this case, the setup is really simple. I'm using a reflector with a grid on our model. I want to make sure that she really pops out with that beautiful dress and of course the cape. Now by setting that up, I already know that on the lowest setting, I came out at ISO 100 2.8, which is great. But I didn't want to shoot on 2.8, I want to shoot on 4 because I also have the chandeliers. Now I like the depth of field, but I don't want it too shallow. So f4. Now you might say raise the strobe 1 stop. Don't. Because I still have to fix in that ambient light, right? And that's already low. So what I did is I wanted to go to f4. So I raised my ISO from ISO 100 to ISO 200, 2.8 to 4. So I'm still in that same sensitivity. So my continuous lighting won't really be affected by this. Now, how do you set up the ambient light? Well, we now know that the strobe is f4, ISO 100, 125th of a second. Now, when you set something up with strobes and normal light, you always have to remember that strobe is just a pulse. It's one time. So it's f8, f11 at once. When you do the same thing with continuous lighting, it just builds up. So that means that the ISO we don't touch, the aperture we don't touch, because f4, ISO 200, that's the strobe. We don't change that. If we change that, we overexpose or we underexpose. What we're now doing is we're using the shutter speed to let in more of that ambient light. Meaning, I see the chandeliers, I raise the shutter speed and the chandeliers will go darker. I open up the shutter speed and, well, the chandeliers will get brighter. Now, you just find the place that you like. Now, in my case, with the Sony cameras, I just look on the back of the camera or through the viewfinder on the what you see is what you get setting, and I will just dial it in the way that I like it. And otherwise, just take some test shots. That's why we shoot tethered, right? We have to make sure that we see everything coming in and we know that we nailed the shot. Now, the moment that I got it right, that's the moment when I put on the strobe again. And now I combine my ambient light with my strobes. But that wasn't interesting enough, of course. Now, when you think about Dracula, when you think about medieval castles, and when you think about those chandeliers, you already got a little bit of a feel of atmosphere, right? So why not use Dracula to the extremes? And let's get some red in, right? Now I'm using one strobe with the red gel, and I'm using that literally like feathering around the final backdrop. So I'm aiming it at the Pro fabric, but just touching also that blue. Now I didn't want that whole blue backdrop to be 100% red. I wanted that backdrop on the sides a little bit still with blue, but still with red accents. And that's what I like about those ClickPropsBackdrops. They really shine with colors. So by aiming my light just slightly to the side, I'm hitting my backdrop from the side, creating a beautiful red glow. But behind the model, I only see the red shining up in certain areas. And I really like that effect. I don't want everything everything red. In this case, just a little bit, and then behind the model, just some red accents. So after I set it up, we already got some images that were really, really nice. Add some motion in there, and wow. But then you start to think like, yeah, is this really it? When you look at a movie, and doesn't just always draw your attention that when somebody turns on a flashlight, that you see a beam of light? And I always wondered, like, why doesn't that happen with my flashlights? Aren't they powerful enough? And then, of course, you start to realize, hey, that's the magic of Hollywood. What they do is they actually pump in smoke or haze, and then as soon as you turn on a strobe or a flashlight, you will actually see that beam of light. And that's, of course, where smoke comes in. So in this set, we wanted to glue everything together, and one of the best glues is smoke. Do make sure that you protect your smoke alarm, by the way. We learned the hard way many years ago. So we want to have smoke, but you don't want smoke everywhere. Now in this case, because we're not using backlighting, the smoke will just appear as a sort of haze. When you use backlighting, that smoke will really just render totally different. But in this case, we're just using it as a haze. Now the first thing I always do is I will make sure that the backdrop is filled with smoke. And then I will just give a little bit of smoke on the front, so the smoke will travel up, and that will actually just glue everything together. So the model is not backdrop, smoke, model, nothing. No, backdrop, smoke, model, smoke in front. And then it really feels like it's one part. So in this case, f4, ISO 200, we ended up with a shutter speed from 1/30th of a second. Now in the end, it's of course also the pose of the model. Now, of course, you want to see the face of the model, right? Why? Think about storytelling. Sometimes what you don't see is way more interesting than what you see. So in this case, we just let it go into the cape and just create a really nice atmosphere. So in essence, it's a really simple setup, but by changing just that red light from the back, you can have a huge difference. So make sure when you set something like this up, you start with your base, that's the strobe, then you turn the strobe off because that's only your base setting. That's how high or how low we can go. After that, you just forget the strobe. Now you work with that aperture and that ISO, and then you start working in that ambient light until you like it. And then you add the strobes again and you start building the set. So I hope you enjoyed this tip, and of course the images, I really like them. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Smash that like button because we really like that, but most of all, tell other people about our channel so we can grow. Thank you so very much for watching, guys. See you with the next tip, and stay creative and bolt your doors and lock your windows, or the other way around. See you next time. Bye, guys.